Antarctica is the most unreachable place on Earth. A continent of endless ice, black water, and violent storms, cut off from the rest of the world like it was never meant to be touched. And yet, for decades, people have believed that something about it has been kept from us, not just because it is remote, but because too many strange stories seem to circle back to the same frozen land. Hidden bases, lost expeditions, old maps that seem to know too much, military operations that raised more questions than they answered, and rumors of things buried so deep beneath the ice that the world was never supposed to find them. Maybe it's all exaggeration. Maybe Antarctica is nothing more than the perfect blank canvas for myth. But that explanation has never fully satisfied the people who keep coming back to it. Because Antarctica does not just feel distant, it feels sealed off. And when a place feels that far removed from the world, people begin to wonder what could exist there without ever being seen. What was discovered there? What was hidden there? And why the mystery around it has never really gone away. Because whether the stories are true, distorted, or deliberately planted, they all return to the same question. What are they hiding in Antarctica? Antarctica is not just remote. It is the kind of place that naturally creates distance between itself and explanation. A continent larger than Europe, buried beneath layers of ice so deep that entire mountain, ranges, lakes, and landscapes have vanished below them. From above, it can look empty, featureless, just white, stretching beyond the horizon. But that emptiness is part of what makes it so unsettling. Because Antarctica does not feel like a place we fully know. It feels like a place we only skim. The surface is brutal enough on its own. Temperatures that can kill in minutes. Winds violent enough to erase movement. Seas so hostile that reaching the continent has always carried the feel of crossing into somewhere the world was not built to inhabit easily. And once you get there, the scale does something strange. Distances lose meaning. Landmarks disappear. The ice keeps its own secrets simply by being vast enough to hide them. That matters, because the mystery around Antarctica does not survive only because people are imaginative. It survives because the continent itself makes certainty difficult, even now. Much of what lies beneath the ice is inferred rather than seen directly. There are lakes below the surface, ancient terrain, buried ridges, structures in the landscape that only emerge through scans, readings, and fragments of data. And every time something new is discovered under the ice, it feeds the same idea, that Antarctica may be hiding far more than we have ever been able to stand on, touch, or verify with our own eyes. This is the perfect setting for stories to grow. A place far from ordinary human movement, a place difficult to access, a place where governments, expeditions, and private interests can all operate behind distance itself. And that is why Antarctica became more than a continent. It became a screen, a blank expanse onto which people began projecting bigger and bigger questions. Questions about what early explorers saw, what military expeditions were really doing there, why some old maps seem disturbingly confident about land long before it should have been charted, why buried anomalies beneath the ice still trigger speculation, why rumors of hidden bases, lost civilizations, and things not meant to be found continue to circle back to the same place. Because before any theory can survive, it needs the right environment. And Antarctica provides exactly that. Distance, silence, scale, and just enough real unknowns beneath the surface to make even the wildest ideas harder to dismiss than they should be. So before we get to the operations, the maps, the buried anomalies, and the stories that have kept this frozen continent wrapped in suspicion for decades, you first have to understand one thing. Antarctica is not mysterious because people imagined too much. Antarctica is mysterious because it is one of the last places on Earth where the unknown still feels physically possible. Long before Antarctica became the subject of military expeditions, secret base theories, and under-ice anomalies, it existed first as an idea, a missing land, a southern world that many believed had to be there, even before anyone could prove it. Ancient geographers called it Terra Australis Incognita, the unknown southern land. It appeared on old maps, not because it had been discovered, but because people believed the world needed balance. If there was so much land in the north, then surely there must be land somewhere in the far south to counter it. For centuries, that was all Antarctica was. An absence, a theory, a shape on paper. Then, in the age of exploration, men began pushing farther south into waters that few had ever crossed. And slowly, the blankness at the bottom of the map began to take on names. One of the earliest and most important figures was the English navigator James Cook. In 1772, Cook left Britain on what became the second of his great voyages. He sailed aboard HMS Resolution with HMS Adventure under the command of Tobias Furneaux. His mission was not simply to find islands. It was to settle one of the great geographical questions of the age. Did the vast southern continent really exist? Cook pushed farther south than almost anyone before him. In January 1773, he became the first recorded explorer to cross the Antarctic Circle. That alone was extraordinary. But what he found was not open land. It was ice, endless ice. Barrier after barrier of it. He saw towering fields and frozen walls that blocked further passage. Again and again, he was turned back by weather, sea ice, and the sheer hostility of the Southern Ocean. Cook never made a confirmed landing on the Antarctic mainland, but he changed the world's understanding of the South forever. He did not prove the continent in a clean, triumphant way. What he proved was something stranger. That if a southern land existed, it was hidden behind conditions so extreme that reaching it would be one of the hardest tasks in exploration. And perhaps even more important than that, Cook helped create Antarctica's atmosphere, a place not easily revealed, place that resisted discovery, a place behind the ice. After Cook, others followed. Not because the mystery had been solved, but because it had deepened. In the early 19th century, sightings multiplied. Different expeditions from different nations began to encounter the same southern edge from different directions. And this is where the story becomes contested, because the question of who first saw Antarctica is still debated. Three names are usually placed at the center of that argument. The first is Fabian Gottlieb von Bellingshausen, a Russian naval officer. Bellingshausen had been born in what is now Estonia and served in the Imperial Russian Navy. In 1819, he led a Russian expedition south aboard the ships Vostok and Mirny. By January 1820, Bellingshausen and his crew reported seeing what many historians now believe was the Antarctic mainland, or at least the continental ice shelf. The second is Edward Bransfield, an officer in the Royal Navy. Bransfield was Irish-born, serving under the British flag, and in the same period, 1820, he is also credited with sighting part of the Antarctic Peninsula. The third is the American sealer Nathaniel Palmer, young, ambitious, and operating in harsh southern waters. Palmer also claimed sightings of Antarctic land in that same narrow historical window. So who was first? Russia points to Bellingshausen. Britain points to Bransfield. Americans point to Palmer. And in a way, that uncertainty is fitting. Even the first verified glimpses of Antarctica do not arrive cleanly. They arrive through rivalry, distance, weather, and disputed records. The continent entered human history the same way it would remain in it. Partially seen, partially argued over, and never fully yielding itself in a simple way. As the century continued, more names were added. The American naval officer, Charles Wilkes, led the United States exploring expedition between 1838 and 1842 and claimed a long stretch of Antarctic coastline. The French explorer, Jules Dumont d'Urville, reached the continent and named Adélie Land after his wife. Then came one of the most famous of them all, James Clark Ross. Ross was a British naval officer and polar explorer who sailed south in the late 1830s and early 1840s aboard HMS Erebus and HMS Terror. His voyage became one of the defining Antarctic expeditions of the century. Ross discovered the Ross Sea. He identified the vast floating barrier of ice, now called the Ross Ice Shelf, which he originally described as the Great Ice Barrier. And he encountered one of Antarctica's most visually powerful landmarks, the volcanic peaks of Mount Erebus and Mount Terror. That matters, because by Ross's time, Antarctica was no longer just an idea or a disputed sighting. It had become a landscape of named immensities. Seas, ice barriers, volcanoes, coastlines. And yet, even with all of that, the core feeling remained the same. Antarctica was still not understood. Its edges had names, but its interior remained overwhelmingly unknown. Its weather still dictated everything. Its ice still blocked movement. Its scale still made ordinary human certainty almost impossible. And that is what makes these early expeditions so important to the mystery of Antarctica. Not just that they happened, but that they never delivered a clean ending. Each expedition came back with fragments. A coastline here, an ice barrier there, a mountain range, a sea route, a new name on the map, but never the whole truth, never the full shape, never the sense that the continent had truly been opened. Instead, each explorer added another layer to the same impression, that Antarctica was real, but still withheld, seen, but not possessed, approached, but not entered in any complete way. And that is the point where history and mystery begin to overlap. Because the first men who reached toward Antarctica did not just discover a continent, they discovered a setting that would keep generating unanswered questions. A place where distance, weather, and ice did not just make exploration difficult. They made interpretation unstable. And from there, it was only a matter of time before Antarctica became more than a destination. It became a stage. A place where later generations would project hidden missions, secret bases, ancient maps, buried structures, and entire lost worlds beneath the ice. But before any of that, there were ships, there were names. There were men from Britain, Russia, France, and America, all pushing south into a white silence that never fully let them in. And that is where Antarctica's modern mystery truly begins. By the time the Second World War ended, Antarctica was no longer just a distant mystery on the edge of exploration. It had become something else. A place where nations could project power, test logistics, and operate far from ordinary public view. And in 1946, the United States launched one of the largest Antarctic expeditions ever assembled. It was called Operation Highjump. Officially, it was known as the United States Navy Antarctic Developments Program, 1946 to 1947. The name itself sounded technical, routine, administrative. But the scale of the operation was anything but ordinary. More than 4,700 personnel took part. The fleet included 13 ships. Dozens of aircraft were deployed. Seaplanes, helicopters, flying boats, support craft. And at the center of it all was one of the most famous polar names in modern history. Rear Admiral Richard Evelyn Byrd. By then, Byrd was already legendary. An American naval officer, aviator, and explorer, he had become one of the defining figures of 20th century polar exploration. He had flown over the North Pole, led multiple Antarctic expeditions, and helped turn the frozen South into a theater of national prestige. When Byrd's name appeared on Operation Highjump, it immediately gave the mission weight. This was not some symbolic visit. This was serious. The official purpose of the expedition was practical. The United States Navy said the mission was designed to train personnel and test equipment in extreme cold conditions. It was meant to expand American experience operating in polar environments. Bases would be established. Aerial reconnaissance would be carried out. Large stretches of the continent would be photographed and mapped from the air. And in the world of the late 1940s, that all made sense. The war had ended, but the modern military world had changed. Cold weather warfare mattered. Air power mattered. Remote logistics mattered. Antarctica was the perfect place to test all of it. And yet, even from the beginning, people noticed how unusual the operation seemed. Because for a mission presented as training and exploration, the scale was enormous. It was not a small scientific survey. It was not a symbolic Antarctic voyage. It looked, to many observers, like a projection of force. A naval task force moving into one of the most remote places on Earth, with ships, aircraft, men, engineering capability, and enough scale to raise a simple question. Why this much? Why here? The fleet itself was divided into groups. The command ship was the USS Mount Olympus. Other vessels included icebreakers, destroyers, tankers, submarines, and supply ships. Aircraft were launched to photograph the continent from above and gather data on terrain, coastlines, and ice. The Americans built a temporary base they called Little America 4, continuing a name already associated with earlier Byrd expeditions. From there, flights pushed deeper inland. Photographs were taken. Land was surveyed. The United States was not simply visiting Antarctica. It was learning how to move through it. That is an important distinction, because one expedition can be explained as curiosity. A massive organized operation teaches something else. Capability. And capability always raises questions about future intent. Operation Highjump lasted only a few months, from late 1946 into early 1947. And that short duration would become one of the reasons so much speculation later attached itself to the mission. Because some people looked at the early end of the operation and asked, why did it conclude when it did? Was the mission fully completed? Was something encountered that changed the timetable? Officially, the answer was simple. The expedition had harsh weather windows, logistical limits, and operational realities. Antarctica is not a place where large missions can simply continue indefinitely. Equipment fails. Ice shifts. Conditions close in. From the official point of view, the mission ended because Antarctic operations are difficult, expensive, and dangerous. That is the rational explanation. And for many people, it is enough. But Operation Highjump did not remain only an official event. It entered the world of rumor. And once it did, its scale, timing, and military character gave those rumors room to grow. Some later claimed the mission had been sent south, not only to train men, but to investigate something hidden. Others pushed further. They argued the United States had gone to Antarctica looking for remnants of a secret Nazi presence. A hidden base, advanced technology, something established in the South before the war had ended. This is where Operation Highjump becomes more than history. Because from this point onward, it begins to function like a hinge, a real military mission carrying enough mystery, enough scale, and enough public distance to become the perfect anchor for later theories. And those theories only grew stronger because of Admiral Byrd himself. Over time, his name became attached to rumors of strange encounters, unknown craft, hidden lands, and places beyond the ice. Some of those stories are almost certainly later inventions. Others are distortions of real interviews or out-of-context remarks. But they survive because Byrd was the kind of figure people wanted to believe had seen more than he was allowed to say. That is the pattern again. A real event. A real operation. A real admiral. And around them, a haze of claims that cannot be fully proven but refuse to die. That is why Operation Highjump matters so much in the mythology of Antarctica. Not because it proves the theories, but because it gives them something powerful, a foundation in reality. A fleet really went south. Thousands of men really went with it. Aircraft really flew over the ice. And for a brief period after the war, one of the largest Antarctic expeditions in history really unfolded in one of the least accessible places on Earth. That alone was enough to leave a mark. Because once you place a military operation of that size onto a continent already wrapped in distance, silence, and incomplete knowledge, people will begin to ask larger questions. What did they see? What did they photograph? What did they learn? And just as importantly, what did they choose not to say? In official history, Operation Highjump remains what it was recorded to be: a major American naval expedition designed to test, train, and map. But in the shadow history of Antarctica, it becomes the point where exploration and secrecy begin to overlap. Not fully, not cleanly, but enough to change the tone of everything that follows. Because after Highjump, Antarctica no longer feels only remote. It begins to feel strategic. And once that happens, the continent stops being just a place at the bottom of the world. It becomes a place people imagine powerful forces might want to reach first, or keep for themselves. And that is where the next layer of the mystery begins. Richard Evelyn Byrd was not just another explorer. He was an American naval officer, born in Virginia in 1888, who became one of the most famous polar figures of the 20th century. He flew over the poles, led multiple Antarctic expeditions, and became one of the first men the public associated with the frozen South. That is what made his name so powerful, because Byrd was real. He had actually been there. He had crossed the ice, flown over it, and returned with the kind of authority that made people listen carefully to anything connected to him. And over time, strange things began attaching themselves to that name. Part of it came from the way Byrd described Antarctica. Not just as cold or difficult, but as vast, silent, and psychologically overwhelming. A place so extreme that it already felt half unreal. That matters. Because once a man like Byrd becomes linked to a place like Antarctica, even ordinary details begin to take on unusual weight. And then came the rumours. Stories that Byrd had seen more than he was ever allowed to say. That somewhere beyond the known ice, he had encountered land that should not have been there. That he had flown farther than official records admitted. That Antarctica concealed hidden regions, warmer valleys, or something even stranger. In the most extreme versions, Byrd was said to have entered another world entirely, a hidden realm beyond the ice, a place the public was never meant to know existed. There is no solid evidence for those claims. Most historians treat the most sensational accounts, especially the so-called secret diary stories, as later inventions or distortions. But the fact that they attach themselves to Byrd at all is what matters. Because people did not choose his name by accident. They chose it because he stood exactly at the point where Antarctica changed, from a place of heroic exploration to a place of strategy, secrecy, and unanswered questions. By the time of Operation Highjump in 1946 and 1947, Byrd was no longer just an explorer. He was tied to a huge American military operation in Antarctica. Ships, aircraft, thousands of personnel. And once people saw his name connected to something that large, the speculation intensified. If Byrd had gone south with that kind of force behind him, many began to ask the same question. What had he seen there before? And what was important enough to return for? That is why Byrd remains at the center of Antarctica mythology. Not because he proved the wildest theories, but because he gave them something far more useful. A credible witness. A real man in a real place. At the exact moment Antarctica stopped feeling like a distant wilderness and started feeling like a secret. And once that happened, the next theory became almost inevitable. That the secrets hidden in Antarctica were not only American, but German too. Before Antarctica became tied to American military expeditions and hidden base theories, the Germans had already gone south. In 1938, Nazi Germany launched an Antarctic expedition to Queen Maud Land in East Antarctica. The mission was led by Captain Alfred Richer, a German naval officer and experienced polar explorer, aboard the ship MS Schwabenland. Officially, the purpose was practical. Germany wanted to scout whaling territory, gather aerial photographs, and mark out a region it could potentially claim for future strategic use. This was not a tiny voyage. Aircraft were launched from the ship by catapult. They flew over the ice, photographed huge stretches of land, and dropped German markers below. The region they associated themselves with became known as Neuschwabenland, New Swabia. That is the documented history. A real expedition. A real captain. A real ship. A real named region of Antarctica. And if the story ended there, New Swabia would be little more than a strange footnote from the years just before the Second World War. But it didn't end there. Because once the Nazis lost the war, people began asking a different question. If Germany had gone that far south before the war, What exactly were they doing there? And more importantly, did they leave anything behind? That is where the conspiracy begins. The most restrained version of the theory says the Germans established some kind of hidden outpost, a remote foothold, a place of shelter, storage, or future use, far from Europe and far from scrutiny. Then the theory grew. Soon the outpost became Base 211, a secret installation beneath the ice, a hidden refuge for senior Nazis, advanced research, or secret weapons projects. And in more extreme versions, the theory expands again. Now the base is no longer just military. It becomes technological, mythical, a place tied to underground caverns, alien technology, or a breakaway civilization that survived the fall of the Third Reich. There is no verified evidence for that. No confirmed base, no confirmed tunnel network, no proof of a surviving Nazi colony under the Antarctic ice. But the reason the theory survived is not hard to understand. The Nazis really did pursue advanced weapons. They really did hide facilities. They really did think in long-term strategic terms. And Antarctica, more than almost anywhere else on Earth, feels like the kind of place where something could disappear simply by distance and silence. That is why New Swabia matters. Not because it proves the theory, but because it gives the theory a real starting point. And then comes the timing. Germany goes south in 1938 and 1939. The war ends. Then, only a few years later, the United States launches Operation Highjump, one of the largest Antarctic operations ever assembled. For conspiracy thinkers, that sequence feels too suggestive to ignore. First, the Germans map and mark territory in Antarctica. Then the Americans arrive in force. From there, the theory almost builds itself. The Nazis found something, or built something, and Highjump was sent to investigate it, confront it, or contain it. There is no solid evidence for that leap, but it is one of the reasons New Swabia remains one of the central pillars of Antarctica mythology, because it connects three things people already find powerful on their own: Nazis, hidden bases, and Antarctica. Put those together, and the mystery almost sustains itself. And once that idea takes hold, every unexplained shape in the ice, every rumor of tunnels, every buried anomaly starts to feel less accidental. As if Antarctica is not only remote, but loaded with unfinished history. For most people, Antarctica's mystery begins on the surface. The ice, the storms, the emptiness. But the deeper mystery may be what lies underneath it. Because beneath the Antarctic ice sheet, there is another world, a buried landscape, mountain ranges, valleys, lakes, ancient terrain sealed off for unimaginable lengths of time. And this is not theory, it is real. One of the clearest examples is the Gambutsev mountain range, a massive chain of mountains hidden entirely beneath the ice in East Antarctica, comparable in scale to major mountain systems elsewhere on Earth, and yet completely invisible from the surface. Then there is Lake Vostok, a huge body of liquid water buried under nearly 4 kilometers of ice. A real lake, sealed away in darkness and pressure for what may have been millions of years. And it is not alone. Scientists have identified hundreds of subglacial lakes beneath Antarctica. That matters, because once you understand that Antarctica is hiding real mountains, real lakes, and real landscapes beneath the ice, the jump to bigger questions becomes almost inevitable. If entire mountain ranges can remain hidden, what else is down there? If a lake the size of a small sea can be sealed beneath the continent, what else has been sealed away with it? This is why Antarctica attracts so many theories, because the buried world is real. And real hidden things make imagined hidden things much easier to believe. That is where the conspiracy starts. Some people believe the ice is covering more than geology. Not just lakes and mountains, but structures, ruins, entrances, even entire lost civilizations. There is no verified proof of that. But the theories survive because Antarctica keeps producing just enough real anomaly to feed them. Radar scans, subglacial maps, buried formations, shapes that can be explained naturally, but never feel quite ordinary once the mystery takes hold. And Antarctica is the perfect place for those ideas to grow, because almost no one can go there and check for themselves. The continent does not only hide things through secrecy, it hides them physically, by depth, by ice, by scale. That makes what lies beneath one of the most powerful questions in Antarctica. Because below the ice is not emptiness. It is a real hidden world. And once you accept that, the next question comes naturally. If nature can survive beneath the Antarctic ice for millions of years, could something else be down there too? Not just buried terrain, but buried history. The name Wilkes Land comes from Charles Wilkes, an American naval officer and explorer born in New York in 1798. Wilkes led the United States exploring expedition between 1838 and 1842, one of the great American voyages of the 19th century. During that expedition, he and his crews charted a long stretch of the Antarctic coastline. The region that now bears his name became one of the earliest large Antarctic sectors, tied directly to a known explorer. For a long time, Wilkes Land was simply another remote part of East Antarctica. Cold, vast, unreachable. But in the modern era, it became attached to something far stranger, a gravity anomaly. In 2006, researchers using satellite data identified an enormous mass buried beneath the ice in the Wilkes Land region. The anomaly suggested something huge lay deep below the surface, roughly 300 miles wide, dense enough to distort the local gravity field, and positioned beneath a circular structure that many researchers interpreted as an ancient impact basin. That immediately got attention, Because if the interpretation was correct, it could mean a giant asteroid had struck Antarctica in the distant past. A collision on a scale large enough to reshape the region and possibly affect the planet far beyond it. Some scientists even proposed that the structure might be linked to one of Earth's great extinction events. That is the grounded explanation. A buried impact crater, a dense mass left behind by an asteroid or geological process. And on its own, that is already dramatic enough. But Antarctica does not let mysteries stay grounded for long. Because the moment people heard there was a massive, unexplained object-like anomaly under the ice, the theories started. Not a crater, not geology, but something artificial. A buried craft, a hidden base, an object too large and too strange to be natural. There is no credible evidence for that. No proof of an alien spacecraft. No proof of a secret installation. But the Wilkes land anomaly became one of those perfect Antarctic mysteries because it sits exactly at the point where real science and speculation collide. A real anomaly. A real hidden mass. A real structure beneath the ice. And almost no way for the public to verify it directly. That is why it stays alive. Because even if the scientific explanation is the most likely one, the image is too powerful to let go of. Something enormous, buried under Antarctica, detected from above, never seen with human eyes. And that is exactly the kind of fact that turns into legend. Because in a place like Antarctica, even real geology can sound like conspiracy. And once a hidden mass beneath the ice enters the story, the next question arrives almost immediately. If something that big can remain buried there for millions of years, what else might still be hidden beneath the continent? Of all the theories attached to Antarctica, Atlantis may be the most ambitious, because this is where the mystery stops being military and becomes ancient. The idea is simple. If Antarctica was once warmer, if forests and rivers existed there millions of years ago, then some people ask an obvious next question. Could it once have supported a civilization? That is where Atlantis gets pulled into the story. Not because Plato ever described Antarctica directly. He didn't. His Atlantis was said to lie beyond the Pillars of Hercules, usually taken to mean beyond the Strait of Gibraltar. That is one reason Antarctica is not one of the classic Atlantis candidates. Most theories place Atlantis somewhere in the Atlantic, or closer to the Mediterranean world Plato actually knew. And yet, Antarctica keeps getting dragged into the discussion. Why? Because Antarctica is one of the few places on Earth that feels physically capable of hiding something that large. A lost city is one thing. A lost civilization is another. Most places on Earth have been walked, dug, settled, mapped, and fought over for too long to hide something on that scale. Antarctica is different. It is buried. And that changes everything. The theory usually goes like this. Long before the continent froze, Antarctica was habitable. If it was habitable, perhaps humans or some earlier advanced culture lived there. Then catastrophe came. Climate shifted. ice took over, and whatever had been built was sealed beneath the continent before recorded history could preserve it. That is the version people want to believe, and it gets stronger every time Antarctica produces another buried mystery. Mountain ranges under the ice, hidden lakes, ancient terrain, shapes that can be seen on scans, but not reached easily. There is no verified evidence that any of this is Atlantis. No ruins have been confirmed. No city has been found. No serious archaeological consensus points to Antarctica as the location of Plato's lost civilization. But the theory survives because it does not need proof to remain powerful. It only needs possibility. And Antarctica, more than almost anywhere else, still offers that. Because even if Atlantis was never there, the continent feels like the kind of place where a forgotten world could vanish completely. Not just hidden, buried, preserved, removed from history itself. That is why Antarctica remains in the conversation, not because it is the strongest Atlantis candidate, but because it is the most physically mysterious one. And once people begin to imagine an ancient civilization beneath the ice, every anomaly starts to look less geological and more historical. That is where the theory lives. Not in evidence, but in the terrifying possibility that beneath the coldest place on Earth, something older than history is still waiting. If Atlantis beneath Antarctica is the ancient version of the mystery, then alien base theories are the modern one. This is where Antarctica stops being just remote, buried or historical, and becomes something else entirely. A place some believe is still being used, not by governments alone, but by something non-human. The theory usually begins with imagery, satellite photographs, aerial scans, sharp geometric shadows in the ice, pyramid-like shapes, dark openings in mountain faces, structures that, to some viewers, look less like natural terrain and more like entrances, hangars, hidden facilities. From there, the theory escalates quickly. If Antarctica is already the most isolated continent on Earth, if access is limited, the climate is lethal, and huge regions remain beyond ordinary human reach, then to conspiracy theorists, it becomes the perfect place for an alien base. Not because there is proof, but because the location feels ideal, far from population, far from scrutiny. A place where unusual movement, strange lights, or hidden structures could exist for decades without normal public access ever exposing them. Some versions of the theory are cautious that unidentified craft have used Antarctica as a covert point of entry or exit, that unusual structures seen in imagery may be something more than rock and shadow. Others go much further, that beneath the ice are active extraterrestrial installations, that some governments know, that others cooperate, that Antarctica is not simply hiding the past, but hosting something in the present. There is no verified evidence for that, no confirmed alien installation, no authenticated structure proving extraterrestrial presence. And many of the most famous pyramids, or hangars, can be explained as ordinary mountain geometry, lighting, erosion, or wishful pattern recognition. But once again, Antarctica is the perfect breeding ground for the theory, because the physical conditions do half the work. Anything there already feels hidden. Anything unusual already feels protected by distance. And anything seen only through a grainy image or a satellite frame immediately gains power, because almost no one can go and check it for themselves. That is why alien base theories survive, not because they are proven, but because Antarctica makes them feel plausible in a way few other places can. A remote, frozen continent, buried anomalies, military history, restricted access, strange shapes in the ice. Put those together, and the alien theory almost builds itself. And once that possibility is introduced, the next question becomes unavoidable. If something is there, how long has it been there? And who exactly already knows? The most extreme Antarctica theory is also the simplest, that Antarctica is not a continent at the bottom of the Earth, but a wall, a vast ring of ice surrounding the known world. This is the core of the ice wall theory, most often associated with modern flat Earth belief. According to the theory, the maps are wrong, the globe is false, and Antarctica is not a frozen landmass at the southern end of the planet, but the outer barrier that keeps the oceans contained. In that version of reality, crossing Antarctica does not take you to another part of the Earth. It takes you to the edge. That is why the continent becomes so important. Because if Antarctica is the wall, then controlling access to it becomes essential. And that is exactly where the theory connects back to everything else. Restricted travel, treaties, military presence, limited access, violent conditions. To believers, none of that looks accidental. It looks like enforcement. There is no credible evidence that Antarctica is an ice wall encircling the world. Modern navigation, satellite systems, aviation routes, and direct polar exploration all contradict it. But the theory survives because Antarctica already feels different from every other place on Earth. Massive ice cliffs, endless white horizons, a continent few people will ever see for themselves. And once a place feels unreachable enough, it becomes easy to imagine it is something else entirely. That is why the ice wall theory matters, not because it is the strongest explanation, but because it is the clearest example of what Antarctica does to the imagination. It takes a real place and turns it into the edge of the world. Antarctica may be the last place on Earth where mystery still feels physically possible. A continent of distance, silence, and ice. Large enough to hide mountains, lakes, ruins, anomalies, and entire worlds of speculation beneath its surface. That is why the stories survive. Not because every theory is true, but because Antarctica never fully closes the door on them. The expeditions were real. The military operations were real. The buried landscapes are real. The anomalies are real. And once those facts are in place, the line between discovery and conspiracy becomes dangerously easy to cross. Maybe Antarctica is exactly what it appears to be. A remote continent made larger, stranger, and more mythic by the limits of human reach. But maybe that is the point, because when a place is distant enough, cold enough, and hidden enough, people begin to wonder not only what is there, but what could be there without ever being fully seen. And that is why Antarctica remains different, not just unexplored, not just inhospitable, but unfinished. A place at the edge of the world, where the unknown still feels possible, and where one question never really goes away. What are they hiding in Antarctica?